Check, 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 check. 1, 2. Check 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me? Can you see me, Keith? Okay. Check, check, check. Check 1, 2, 3. Check 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Check 1, 2. 1, 2, 3. Checking 1, 2. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Check, 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 check. 1, 2, 1, 2. Check 1, 2, 3. Check, check. 1, 2, 1, 2. Audio visual test for the Pembroke School Committee. Check, check, 1, 2. April 1st, 2024. Check, check, check. Check 1, 2. Checking 1, checking 2. Check 1, 2, 3. Check, 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 check 1, 2. Check 1, 2, 3. Audio visual test.
Alright, brother, you're coming in. I'm getting you.
Awesome. Thank you, Keith.
get going. We're going to start. So I'm just going to let her quiet the kids. All right. So are we all turned on here? Yeah, all right.
Use your outside voice.
All right. Welcome to the Pembroke School Committee meeting of Monday, April 1st, 2024. We are really lucky today because we have in the house Girl Scout Troop 77434, and they are going to recite the Pledge of Allegiance for us, and as well as the Girl Scout Pledge and Law. So if you would all stand with me, they're going to come on up first, and then we're going to all stand together. All right. Okay, if everyone could stand up. You can start whenever you want. Ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Nice job, ladies.
Good job. Our Girl Scout promise.
On my honor, I will try to serve God and country, to help people at all times, and to live by the Girl Scout law. I will do my best to be honest and fair, friendly and helpful, considerate and caring, courageous and strong, and responsible for what I say and do. And to respect myself and others, respect authority, use resources wisely, make the world a better place, and be as every Girl Scout.
All right.
Big bows.
Now you can bow.
Excellent work, girls.
Great job.
Oh, don't forget your papers, sweetie.
Nice job, ladies.
Thank you so much. That was great.
So cute.
I still remember the Girl Scout pledge.
Exactly. I was thinking like you. All right, great. So welcome, everybody. If anybody would like to make any public comment, now would be a great time to do so. Is there anybody who would like to comment? Okay. All right, so on to communications. Any communications? Any adjustments to the agenda?
No.
This is really quick. So, so the warrants are being circulated, and do we have so consideration for approval, do we have a motion to approve the school committee meeting minutes of March 19th?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, and so the ayes have it. And I think at this time, we're going to just take a short recess until the rest of advisory and select board gets here, which will happen at 7 o'clock. So thank you for everyone who came at 6:30, but that's the extent of our, so we're just gonna take a short recess. And I'm going to hand it over to Dan. We've already called our meeting to order, so if you want to.
Yes, so I call the April 1st, 2024 special select board meeting to order.
Great. And do you want to call your meeting to order?
I call the April 1st meeting of the advisory committee to order.
Okay. So I'm just going to remind everybody to make sure when you're talking to speak into the microphone so that the folks at home can hear you. So I know we don't have enough for everybody, but if you could share the mics, that would be great. And so with that, can we just do like a quick introduction? Maybe, I think, everybody knows the select board members, but I don't think we all know the advisory board members. So can we just go down and have everybody introduce themselves?
Certainly. My name's Bob Kenny. Jeff McMaster. Steve Walsh.
I'm Sandy Eaton.
Linda Peterson.
Brian Logan.
Stephen Pat. Tim Landy.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody. All right. And so now we're going to move on to the superintendent's report. You should all have a copy.
So in front of you, you just have a printout of what was sent over the weekend, minus the collective bargaining agreement I think we sent you to. We didn't print that out for you, but you have that electronically. So I'm going to go through what we have tonight for our admin recommended budget. So this is really the culmination of about 5 months worth of work between the administrators, the school committee, various department heads, and our building leaders. I'm going to start a little bit with some historical budget information, talk a little bit about our maintenance of effort budget that we presented back in January, share with you all kind of where we landed with our administrative recommended budget, and then talk about our timeline and next steps. You guys can stop me at any time if you have a question. So we show this slide each year just to give a historical picture of where we are as the schools versus where the town is, to give some history on our Chapter 70 increase. Many of you have heard us say multiple times that the Chapter 70 increase year to year is pretty dismal. It's generally around 0.5%. Coincidentally, this year it is 0.53%, just about 0.5%. That number there reflects the $30 per student that was in the governor's budget. Obviously, there's conversation at the state level for that number to potentially increase, but we just go with the safest estimate at the time. On the right-hand side, you can see our school budget as a percentage of the town budget. I just want to, for those that aren't familiar with the way we work with the town, the school does not budget for its benefits within our operating budget. That's budgeted on the town side. So retirement benefits for our employees that are part of Plymouth County, as well as our health insurance is budgeted on the town side.
Erin,
Yep.
if, right now we're budgeting $30 ahead for Chapter 70 funding. If that comes in at $60 ahead, have you and Bill already worked out what happens?
Yep, we talked a little bit about that. It would be similar to kind of how it worked this year, is that the increase would happen in the fall. We're hopeful it will come in at $100 a person, right? 120, maybe 1,000, something excellent. This is just an overview of our per pupil spending. So where we are as Pembroke versus where the state average is. I'm pretty sure you've never heard us say that we're looking to be the state average. But this graph does show you on the left-hand side what we spend per pupil historically for the students we educate within district. And on the right-hand side, it shows you the per pupil for this, including all students, so even the students that are in special education out of district placements. The reason why we pull them apart because special education out of district placements are really individual case scenarios. You could have a student in a residential placement that's $1.5 million. And so it's not really apples to apples when you're comparing communities based off of the number of students and the type of placements they have them in and out of district placements. So taking away the out of district students and really focusing on what it costs to educate our students within the district is how we've shared this historically.
Now, years ago, we used to be 9th from the bottom in per pupil spending. We still gave, in my view, a tremendous advanced placement offering. We have a tremendous music program, sports program, extracurriculars. I know we've made some progress. The last I checked, we were like 22nd from the bottom. Is that still?
I think it's 24th this year, out of 351 districts.
Okay.
When we compare ourselves, we generally like to compare ourselves to our neighbors, right? So the Hanovers, the Duxburys, the Abingtons, to see where we are in relation to them. That is not an apples-to-apples comparison, but it is something we all just tend to do. So this slide here shows you our per-pupil expenditures broken out by the categories that they're reported in at the state level. So in the back of the slide deck, there's an appendix that tells you what type of expenditures fall into each of those categories. But on this slide, you can see Pembroke is at the top, and then alphabetically, these are the communities that we generally norm ourselves against when we're talking about our neighbors, and just throwing in the state average at the bottom. The next slide is really apples to apples. So these are our DART schools as dictated by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. So these are school districts that are like us socioeconomically, like us enrollment-wise, like us population-wise, demographics, all of that. So these are the people you should really be comparing yourselves to. So same setup on the slide. I think it's important to point out that when we're reporting expenditures in these categories, it does vary a little bit community to community on how people do it. So for example, here in Pembroke, we have K through 12 content supervisors that we talk about regularly at this table. For us, those employees fall under instructional leadership. In other communities like Duxbury, for example, where there are traditional high school department heads, they fall into teachers. So in those communities, that staff is part of the collective bargaining agreement. In our community, they are not. They are individual service contract employees, so they're instructional leadership as opposed to teachers. So there are some nuances to that as you go community to community, but this is really the best way to overall compare yourself to like communities. I think it's important to point out some of the highlights here. So we talk a lot about grants and grants opportunities. You can see our professional development spending is quite low in comparison to our comparable districts. We do a lot of grant writing within district to get professional development opportunities for our faculty. Something that's not such a bright spot is our operations and management. You can see that our operations budget is a little bit lower than our comparable districts. And I think when you hear us talk globally about capital and kind of where the state of our buildings are at this point, that comes to light. So we are saving dollars in that area, but eventually those type of lack of expenditures do catch up with you over time. In the benefits column, it does vary district to district in the sense that there are some communities that are 50% health insurance shares. Obviously, we are still 75-25 here, but some of these communities that are comparable to us are a 50-50 share.
Question. Do you have historical data for per pupil expenditures for, say, 5 years ago?
Sure.
Just so we have a quick comparison.
I don't have it with me right this second, but I can send it to you.
Well, if you go back, right, so if you go back to this slide here, right?
It tells you ours, it doesn't tell you.
Oh, it doesn't,
like
right, it doesn't give
communities.
the comparison, that's true, that's
Yeah.
right.
I'm just curious the jump in that one aspect.
In the total per pupil, Dan, or the breakout?
Just the total, just
Yeah.
to see what we spent per pupil 5 years ago compared to now.
So in
So that
fiscal,
I'm
is
sure
on
the
that.
trends are probably total budget trend,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So it must be within that range.
Yep.
But I was curious if you had it.
Right, so our total per pupil is on this slide ahead of it in the orange. That's our total per pupil for the past
Oh, you can call it from there.
11 years or so.
so it's about, so 5 years ago, it was about $15,000. This year, it's a little over $19,000 per pupil, Dan.
It's a 16 number.
Oh, 60,
It's a
16.
16,596, yeah.
So you were looking at the state number.
Oh, sorry, I was looking at the state number, so it's 12 versus 16.
Got it, that's exactly what it
Yeah,
was.
yeah, thanks.
So how did we get here? We started with maintenance of effort. So maintenance of effort is us doing everything we're doing this year at next year's prices. So our collective bargaining increases, our transportation contract increases, adjusting for increases in tuition, keeping the same staffing levels and class sizes across the district. We produced that in November this year, so it's generally a January timeline. This year we really worked hard to get it done earlier. So in November, we were at $39,574,698 to, again, do everything we're doing this year at next year's prices. As I go through the remaining slides, you'll see that we don't have any required additions. So occasionally, year over year, there's a special education required addition we need to make, whether it's a teacher or a paraprofessional or another service provider in order to meet the needs in some of our students' IEPs. We don't have any of those going into next year. And then the process that we do internally, after all of the department and school-based budgets have been presented at the school committee level, we get together and list out everything that was asked for. And of course, we front load when we're giving those presentations that it's that department or that school's opportunity to create their wish list, right? So when you're sitting down, what I ask you to do is put down what it would take to move your building or your department forward, to align where you need to be to get to your goals, fiscal climate aside. I think it's important that department heads and school leaders have a vision for their building and their department, and that the fiscal constraint doesn't hinder them from doing that. So they do feel like wish lists at times.
Yes, they do.
But we do get together and put them all out on a spreadsheet, and then we rank them. And so for us administratively, priority level 1 means it's something we absolutely cannot continue to do without moving it to the next fiscal year. 2s and 3s are something that we wanted to get on the radar, maybe a must-have next year, but again, not something that is do or die for this upcoming fiscal year. We did not rank anything in the list of about 77 items as a level 1 priority. We are very conscious of the fiscal climate, and we knew in order to fund anything as a level 1 priority, we would have to cut something else. It would either be a programmatic reduction or a effect on class size or services offered, so we did not administratively move anything forward. Each year, we take a series of adjustments on our budget. This year, if you tuned into some of the conversations that happened at the Joint Budget Subcommittee, we went extensively through our revolving accounts and highlighted 2 areas where we are taking in fees that we could use in the future year to offset our operating budget. So in our building utilization fund, we highlighted about $50,000 we could use to offset next year. We do rent out 5 classrooms at Bryanville Elementary School to the North River Collaborative, so they do pay us rent there. So using a portion of that rent to offset the budget next year. In our transportation account, those of you who have had secondary students know that we charge for a bus pass. So we do want to use those fees that come in for those bus passes as an opportunity to offset some of the expense associated with transportation. So there's about $100,000 in that revolving account that we would use.
And Erin, just for everyone's benefit, the total cost of transportation is how much?
It's, for regular ed transportation, it's just under $2 million. So again, the fee that we collect in no way, shape, or form offsets the cost associated with transporting students, but and if we can use those fees to offset having to reduce a teacher or another staff member, we absolutely want to do that. In municipal finance law, one of the only things that you can pre-buy is special education tuition. So that means we would use dollars from this fiscal year in order to pay for tuition for students for next year. You can pay in advance for a quarter of a year of a private placement or a full year of collaborative tuition. We have been fortunate enough to do this in the past five fiscal years consistently, which then allows us to drop down the amount that we need to budget in the upcoming fiscal year for special education tuition pre-buy. So this year we have about $525,000 in our fiscal year 24 budget that is set aside to buy tuitions for next fiscal year. With all of those adjustments on our maintenance of effort budget, that brought us in at just under $38.9 million, which leaves us with about a $1.2 million budget gap. We are making some enrollment reductions. There's obviously, when students get to the upper elementary grades, our ideal class size is 25 or less. In grades K through 2, it's 22 or 23 or less. So there is some flexibility as the students get into the later grades of elementary to make some enrollment reductions in some of our sections that are running at 16 or 17. So there's 4 reductions we'll be making. As we said on the previous slide, we are using the $30 per student in the governor's budget as our increase in Chapter 70, and Bill and I and the Joint Budget Subcommittee have worked really closely together to drive up that next number. So the increase in the town contribution has grown astronomically, I would say, in the past 30 or 45 days, so we're at about $835,510, which leaves us just internally solving for a budget gap of about $40,000. So the school committee tonight is also going to have their fee conversation. I would anticipate if there was an increase in any of the fees that we're currently charging, that would offset that budget gap. Also, it's not something that we're necessarily dead set on solving for. So something in the range of $30,000 to $40,000 is absolutely reasonable to bring into the next fiscal year as a deficit in a $39 million budget. That's one less order of copy paper or a quick change, and something over the course of the fiscal year that we would be able to account for those funds. A couple of our level 1 admin priorities we were able to accomplish without any additional funding. So currently, our structure is we have a content supervisor for humanities, a content supervisor for world languages, a content supervisor for the arts, and a content supervisor for math, and a content supervisor for science. Next year, we will be shifting to a model that's just a STEM content supervisor, so combining the math and science at the secondary level and creating an elementary content supervisor. This really serves two purposes for us. It's really important at where we're at with our programs and our instructional materials to have someone that's really focused on the elementary curriculum as we start to get into a decade of Envision Math, to be moving away from some of our Pearson science materials, working towards Open SciEd in our upper elementary grades. Having somebody at the elementary level focused on those shifts is really important for our teachers and for us administratively. It also helps us build a bench at the elementary level for some admin opportunities. So when we have an opening, whether it's a principal or an assistant principal at the elementary level, we don't have a lot of staff that apply with any type of leadership experience internally because we don't have a lot of opportunities for them internally to express leadership. This is a place where somebody that is potentially in the future interested in administration could take a small step and see if it's something that really interests them, therefore helping us build a little bit of a bench when we have an opening in the future. There was some die-hard fans on the admin team for the subscription version of the Dibbles screener that we use. Was presented both during the elementary budget presentation in February and in the teaching and learning presentation just a couple of weeks ago. What this paid subscription does is allow the software to do a lot of the data analysis that our reading specialists are currently doing, which would then allow them some additional time to get into classroom and work with small groups of kids, which is ideally where their time is best spent. Bill and I had a great conversation last week about some curricular materials that we could be using capital funds for. So the Envision Math request that Mary Beth spoke about in her teaching and learning presentation has been moved to capital funding as a source.
Erin, could we stop there for a
Of
minute?
course.
Okay. So the content supervisors, I really want to make sure I understand it. So you have 4 people right now, humanities, world language, math and science?
In arts.
And art.
Yeah.
And then the math and science will come down to one person STEM.
STEM, and then we'd use the other available slot to be an elementary content supervisor.
Okay, so
So I-
people will just be moving, shifting positions. Okay.
On the next slide, sorry. On the next slide is a whole bunch of things that we were able to accomplish in our FY25 budget that were part of the individual department budgets that have no net effect on our operating budget because they're budget neutral. So there was some phonics materials at the elementary level that were identified. We're able to kind of repurpose some of the building-based supply funds for those materials. The social emotional learning curriculum that Mr. Murphy spoke about during the elementary presentation is able to be grant funded. There's been a population shift in our special education department, so we're able to use a staff member that was previously working with our transition program into our middle school for additional support for students. Mark talked extensively about his want to increase the opportunities at Pembroke High School for extracurricular activities and clubs for students. So he's looking to reallocate some of his building-based general expense funds towards that purpose. We have been really conscious about our ESSER 1, 2, and 3 spending. So ESSER 3 is able to be spent through September 30th of 2024, and we have been planning all along to replace technology with that last bucket of money. So in our ESSER 3 funds, we have enough funds available for the wide-scale Chromebook replacement that Brandon Hall talked about during technology, as well as the iPad replacement and the computer science lab replacement at Pembroke High School. There's also an interest to replace the digital arts lab at the high school. Computer science is the top priority for them, so we will tackle that with ESSER 3. And if there is any funds available at year end, we will look to do some work on the digital arts lab.
Question.
Yep.
How often do you guys replace your Chromebooks?
So it is these Chromebooks that are up for replacement now are 5 and 6 years old. We do have some that are a little bit older than that. It really depends if the students are taking them back and forth every day. So our secondary students take them home to home and to school each day. Some of our elementary grade levels keep them in the classroom, so you're able to get a little bit longer out of them, so it's less wear and tear. Ideally, the manufacturer will tell you that it can last for 6 to 7 years. I have a kid with a Chromebook, and I'll tell you we're going to be lucky if we get 3 years, right? I see the way he's slapping it around out of his backpack. But it is, we do kind of build our replacement schedule on a 5-year replacement for those
Okay,
devices.
no, that's great, because Chromebooks, they're meant to last for a while because
Right.
of the cloud capability.
Originally, when they came out, they were saying it was a 3-year replacement. They do support the operating system on them for up to 7 years, I think, is the oldest ones that we have still in circulation now.
Follow-up. I have a follow-up question. Didn't we get a ton of iPads and Chromebooks during COVID?
We did. So in 2020, we got 1,000 Chromebooks and iPads for that first year. So this is not those. We're not replacing those. These are the Chromebooks that were existing in the district prior to 2020. So those are up for replacement now, and then 3 years from now, those original ones that we got with the CARES money would be up for replacement. What we've talked about internally and at some of the subcommittee meetings is about moving forward. Obviously, there's an appetite to use capital funding for those type of things. We've talked about getting into a lease purchase agreement. We are in a lease purchase agreement with some of our technology. But the other piece of it is really a family piece. So, are we transitioning to the place where there is a student fee at the secondary level that includes your extracurricular clubs and your device that we give you in 9th grade and that serves you through 12th grade? So I think that's, as we start to get towards that really big chunk of Chromebooks from 2020 needing to be replaced, that's the way the conversation will move on our side.
And these are same or similar models, so the parts are interchangeable, like if somebody smashes.
Yeah, so
you can replace the monitor on one and then you don't reach out to
so
each
our
module.
tech department is small but mighty. We have a help desk, an IT help desk. We have tech interns, and they are all well-versed at taking them apart, scrapping them for pieces. They use them to replace screens, to replace keyboards. They take every piece out of them that we can.
Just as a follow-up to that, when we had that budget presentation, right, the technology integrator and the person who runs our help desk literally walked us through. They have bins of parts from these things that they recycle and reuse, whether it be sort of screens or keyboards or mice, whatever it is. They're constantly reusing every part they possibly can from almost every device until it just fails.
That's awesome, because that's a huge budget light item, so the amount of money
Huge.
that you guys are saving
Yeah.
by managing it that way is immense, probably.
Right, it's also a commitment with families in the sense that when you get a device from us, you're signing a contract that says, if I break the screen, if I lose the charger, this is how much it costs. So that we do share that with families on the front end as part of the handbook process. But as a parent, most of us know that nobody ever knows how the screen got cracked or where the charger went. It's a mystery everywhere you go.
I did not drop it in the water.
Okay.
I have a question that's more out of ignorance, but is this because we're replacing textbooks?
So most of our curricular materials are online now. We do, in most instances, have a classroom set of textbooks, but we don't buy, 210 biology textbooks anymore. We buy a classroom set of textbooks, and then the material is available online for students.
So there's a wash here a little bit. We're saving money on textbooks, presumably.
Correct. You still have to pay a subscription for the online textbook.
Oh, okay.
It's not as expensive as the paper copy, but there is still a subscription associated with it.
Thank you.
Yep. The next thing is access points. So up in the ceiling in most rooms, you'll see an access point. It's over there by the door. It's right underneath the door over there. That's our wireless internet. Those of you with children in the district know that that has been less than reliable this year. We have replaced many of the access points that are identified as in need of replacement through an overhaul of our network that has happened over this winter. But the additional access points that Brandon pointed out that need to be upgraded can be done using some of the E-rate funding that we have available. In our athletic budget, Brian Phillips, our Director of Athletics, talked a lot about renovation of the practice fields at the high school. So those get a ton of use both from our sports teams as well as the youth sports teams. We did put in an application through CPC a couple of years ago for renovation work on those fields. We haven't spent that money yet, so that is still sitting there. The same with the softball scoreboard. The conversation with CPC, I think it might have been 4 years ago at this point, was that any funds left over from the field renovation could be used for the scoreboard or any other improvements on the campus there. Just talked a little bit about the new IEP professional development that was needed during the student services presentation. We've identified grant funding for that. And the two really small dollar amount items that we talked about when we were talking about our English language learner population, the Pocket Talk, so really the handheld translators, and some curriculum materials we'll be able to really figure out as we get closer to June 30th and see what we have left for funds.
Erin, what's the useful life on the access points?
I'll say 6 months.
So when we first started with our wireless network, the access points were housed on a physical controller. Then 3 years into the process, the access points were housed on the cloud controller. So now we're in a place where we have like a 50-50 split in some of our buildings, which causes some of the confusion that we have. They should last 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
I think, when we started this process 8 years ago with our wireless network, the thought process at the time was that every single classroom should have an access point in it. The technology now says that's not the case. There should be a shared access point where students can get on from the hallway. So we are, as we replace our access points, replacing them with fewer than we had originally purchased. But 3 to 5 years really is the useful life on those.
Okay.
Follow-up question on that. There's some things I've been hearing through the grapevine that the Wi-Fi is really difficult inside the buildings. Does the access points alleviate that?
So the access points help with that, but these buildings were never constructed for wireless signal, right? So if you look around here, just right out the front door, it's a cement block construction in all of our buildings. The signal does not really transcend cement, so it is difficult to, signal strength is difficult in the building. What we've really worked on in the past 3 to 4 years is reliability of connection. So that was also part of the problem. Those of you that live up over by the high school know that that's pretty much a dead zone for your cell phone and whatnot. The same thing is happening inside the buildings over there as well. So really our focus and work internally has been on reliability of signal for the students and for staff, not necessarily the signal strength within the building from classroom to classroom, which is why we're in the place where there's some buildings that have an access point in every room, there's some buildings that have it in the hallway shared by 2 rooms, so really navigating that. But there is a vendor that we're working with that is helping us to really get the network to where it needs to be. It has definitely gotten better over the past 3 years. This November and December aside, that was an anomaly. But I think if you talk to students and staff, the reliability of being able to get a network connection in our buildings is much better than it was 5 years ago.
Thank you.
Next one's the sad slide, the things that we didn't get to do. So these are the rest of the items that were asked for during the presentations. We lovingly refer to them as level 2 and level 3. I think it hurts people's feelings when we put a number next to them, so these could all be a 2 or they might be a 3. So we talked about some math interventionists, similar to our reading specialist model, adding some reading interventionists. We were fortunate with some of the COVID money in earlier phases of ESSER to have interrupted learning tutors at our buildings that really did some targeted reading instruction with students, in addition to our reading specialists do. So reading specialists really worked with the K through 2 population. The interrupted learning tutors were able to really expand that and do some higher elementary grades as well. So there was a request to look at adding that back. The middle school SPED teacher, really expanding a co-teaching model there. A couple of times we've talked about a coordinator of behavioral wellness and counseling. 8 years ago, we cut our director of guidance as part of a restructuring and budget reduction. There's not a lot of high schools or communities in Massachusetts that don't have some sort of director of counseling or guidance. We are one of the few. We are fortunate enough to have one tech integrator at the elementary level. For the past couple of years, both Mark and Donna have been asking for a similar structure at the secondary level. So this is somebody that works directly with our teachers for integrating technology in the classroom. Teachers are creatures of habit and sometimes nervous to try something new. So this is somebody that goes in and really, facilitates that for them as well. And Mike Tinker was here as Patrick referenced when we did our tech presentation. He will come in your classroom, he'll teach a lesson on technology, right? He'll talk about digital citizenship. And so taking that model and expanding it to the secondary level, so our staff at the middle school and high school feel like they have a dedicated person to work with if they want to try something new in their classroom. As I said before, our tech department is very small but very mighty, but is in need of expansion at some point. The Department of Elementary and Secondary Education does produce staffing ideal levels based off of the number of devices and number of staff that you have in your building. We are woefully behind that model, but we are making it work. So the request at the tech presentation was for an additional network administrator. We talked during student services about, we used to have an out-of-district coordinator, so somebody that worked directly with our special education families that had students in out-of-district placements, managed those, I think 30 to 34 IEPs that we have for those students, attended those meetings. That was cut 11 years ago, and we have not been able to add it back yet, but we are in a place where our administrative resources are thin. So I know Jess, our Director of Student Services in the audience, does some of our out-of-district coordination for our students, as well as Megan Cullum, our secondary team chair. This is definitely a wish list item, a press box at Pembroke High School. Seems to get some traction in the community. Every now and again, there's somebody that's gung-ho about it until they realize how much it costs to do it. So that's about $125,000. Brian Phillips, our Director of Athletics, is still going to chip away at that goal and try to do something on the side, but again, not something that we were looking to reduce current staff in order to accomplish for next year. Bill and I have talked a lot about the next one. There's obviously some capacity for us to share some services, facilities, and operations being one of those. Neither of us has a facilities director in our budget, so it is a wish list item, but something that we could look in the future to sharing between the town and the schools. During the facilities presentation, we talked a lot about the increased cost associated with services for our building operations and management. So that contracted services line, I think, is $350,000 or $275,000. And increasing that, we've seen an increase in our HVAC repairs. We've seen an increase in our needs electrical. So all of the buildings were renovated or remodeled between 1998 and 2001, which means all of the toilets are from 1999. So with one fixture is breaking, the rest of them are in that same cycle. So we're seeing a lot of plumbing repairs, electrical repairs, and HVAC repairs in all 5 of our buildings.
I actually think that's a position that could pay for itself. We have someone doing that full-time, getting on a plan, or replacement plan. I actually think that's something that down the road, over the course of some years, would actually pay for itself, in my opinion.
Right, I think this
Maybe
year would
we
just
have
be.
to pay for the post-employment benefits. That's a big
That's a
thing.
good point.
We used to have a custodian district-wide that did the exterior maintenance for all 5 buildings. That was cut 11 years ago. You know, we're in a place where we could use some additional help in the custodial area. Our buildings are very lightly staffed. We do meet the minimum requirement for square footage per cleaning personnel, but sometimes kids are gross. There's no better way to say it. So each of our buildings has 1 day shift custodian, and at the elementary and middle school, there's 2 night shift custodians. If you've been in those buildings, you know they are very large buildings. That is a lot of square footage for 2 people to tackle each night. The high school has 3.5 nighttime custodians, so a little less square footage there. But again, our buildings are used all of the time. When we walked by, I think there were some basketball folks in the gym here. There's cheerleading. There's always somebody in the buildings all the time. We have seen an increase in our caseloads for our school psychologists. So during student services presentation, we talked a little bit about what it would look like if we added half of the school psychologists to lessen the caseloads across the district. So lessening the caseloads for school psychologists would mean that they would do less testing and report writing and have more time in their day to run small groups with students. You know, some of you have heard of lunch bunches or social groups, really giving those staff an opportunity to work directly with kids instead of testing students and writing reports. We've done a lot of work in our Pathways program in the past 3 years. When we started with the Pathways program, we have always talked about the fact that at some point there'll need to be somebody dedicated to coordinating that program. This year, we have a .6 coordinator, Mary Ellen Gates. She's presented a couple times to the school committee. She currently does that for part-time and then teaches 2 business courses at the high school. As we move through the next year and then the following year of students in our Pathways programs at the high school, we're looking at the numbers in the low 100s of students that she's needing to place in internships. That's going to be very difficult to do while still maintaining a teaching load at Pembroke High School. So when we added the .6 position last year, we talked about this is a step towards a full-time position and coordination as we get into the future years of the program. We are delighted with the number of students and families that selected both the biomedical pathway and the manufacturing and engineering pathway, but with that comes a need to support those students as well.
I
Something
have a
we've
question about pathways.
Yep.
Sorry, I don't believe I've ever asked this before, but with the look towards the VOTEC, right, the planning that's happening, how does that affect the investment in pathways, or not at all?
So, not at all. Our pathways were never meant to be an alternative for vocational education.
Okay.
Our pathways are an opportunity for students to get some hands-on, real job experience, to test out a career, to see if it's something they like. That's great for our students that are looking to figure out what they want to study in college, but the intent was really to get our students some sort of employable skills when they graduate high school. There are a number of kids that don't go right on to college or don't go on to college at all, but giving them the opportunity to get a Microsoft Office certification gives them a step up on somebody else that's applying for the same job out of high school. It was never meant to be a vocational exchange, right?
So these things will coexist?
They would
potentially.
definitely coexist, yes.
Mhm.
It wasn't last year, wasn't it fully grant funded or mostly grant funded, the pathways?
No, so our pathways, we've used the current staff that we have at Pembroke High School, so really shifting some of the courses that we offer. A lot of the materials for our engineering and manufacturing pathway and biomedical pathway were grant funded last year. Some of that funding for professional development exists next year. We also got some capital funds the year before last for the engineering pathway. Once you purchase those large-scale materials, they're meant to last a while, right? So it's the consumables that we'd be buying year over year, and some of that's grant funded, and some of us that would come out of our operating budget.
But a significant amount was, that was
Mhm.
grant funded, so, yeah.
And then the last thing that we weren't able to fund this year, but is an amazing thing, and we'd love to get towards it, is some sort of elementary world language opportunity for kids. There was quite a robust conversation at the school committee level in regards to languages that we offer at the secondary level, some dwindling numbers in Latin and French. Some of that has to do with our students not taking 2+ years of a foreign language, but really wondering what that would look like if students were exposed to it earlier. There are a number of neighboring districts that do offer an orbit, for lack of a better word, of world language at the upper elementary grades, so grades 5 and 6, so that you can get exposed to a couple of the languages before you get to the middle school and make a selection.
There's something missing on the list. And I think it's really important for us to understand it and for this to be singled out and pointed out. So it doesn't get a lot of airwaves or press, but Erin actually fulfills 2 jobs within the district. So she's both the superintendent of schools and she is officially our business manager, both of which are required. Erin is one of the only superintendents, candidly, that I've seen that carries both certifications and is willing to perform both of those jobs at the same time. It saves the district, under current market rates, about $130,000 a year, and that's without a 25% add-on benefits to that. And we've been fortunate. I've been asking Erin to think about trying to figure out how to get a business manager for 8, 9, almost 10 years, because candidly, the business manager is both a governance check on the superintendent, but is also an employee of the school committee. We haven't done that for all of the reasons that you're looking at tonight. So our main philosophy and our main goal is to preserve the classroom and to make sure that the classroom, and that every dime we can get into the classroom, we do, and a lot of times we do it at the expense of administrative roles and administrative positions and overhead roles. But if Erin, and I pray to God this doesn't happen, but if Erin decided that she had an opportunity that she cannot say no to, we would have to hire a superintendent at likely very close to, if not more than, her current salary, as well as a business manager. So it's just something that I want all of us, and I'm going to use this opportunity where we're all together to focus on, because between the business manager, the director, I mean, this is behavioral wellness and counseling, but think of it as your guidance director from years past, no facilities director or operations manager or director, just those roles alone. What we've made the decision as a school committee to do is to redeploy about $500,000 to $600,000 and preserve the classroom. It's not, I mean, I say it's not a sustainable model, but we've been doing it for at least 10 years that I've been involved with. But it is just something that we have to be very aware of. It's one of the reasons why we can put on the programming in the AP program, in the sports offerings, and the extracurricular activities being 22nd to the bottom on per pupil spending in the Commonwealth. So I only throw it out there because, well, some of these things can absolutely wait. That is something that eventually we're going to have to figure out. And I just put it on everyone's radar because I think it's an important discussion point that we all, as a collective body, are going to have.
Did the previous superintendent have a business manager?
Yes, it was Aaron.
It was me. And so when I took over as interim superintendent, I kept both because we weren't sure whether I was going to be the superintendent or not. And then that year, we had to make some budget reductions, so we reduced the business manager when I was appointed as superintendent.
In fairness, Dan, almost every district in the Commonwealth has both roles.
I knew the answer.
Oh, you did? Yeah. No, I appreciate it. Yeah.
Thanks, Patrick. Good point.
I'm not going anywhere. I continue to do both jobs. I'm happy to do both jobs. I'm also sometimes the part-time custodian, whatever it takes.
She was vacuuming.
I was
here, by the
vacuuming.
way.
She literally was.
So, no, don't send it to my husband because he'll wonder why I don't vacuum at home. So for next steps, we are obviously going to talk about fees tonight as well. We have a second meeting scheduled for April 23rd to continue to talk about fees if it spans past tonight. If there's any additional budget balancing that needs to happen, we have the opportunity to schedule a third meeting in April if needed. That would be on April 30th. If we're still not in a place where the school committee is ready to move forward with the budget that we have. And then by law, we have to hold a public budget hearing ahead of town meeting. So currently that's scheduled for May 7th.
Great.
In your packets and in what I sent you before the weekend is a whole bunch of backup information that is also available on the website. There's some enrollment information. There is some of the reductions that we've taken in past years. I gave you a summary of our revolving accounts, and I gave you that clarification on what reporting codes fall into those per pupil categories that we talked about on those previous slides. So, great.
I also just want to point out one more thing is when you go to the microscopic font in the back, which is class sizes.
I made it bigger.
In the appendix, apparently. You really do need a magnifying glass. One of the things that we spent a lot of time on in the Joint Budget Subcommittee was we're reviewing these slides. And the reason being is there's a lot of question about enrollment has been declining, and it has been declining. I mean, it's down significantly over the past 10 years. Why is your budget growing? Right? And it's the elephant in the room. I think you've got to ask that question. And I think we, as a fiduciary, having a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayer, should regularly be asking that question. We have, over the past 7 years, Aaron, is that right? Cut the reductions, the enrollment-driven
Yeah,
reductions.
so those are in the back.
So we reduced headcount $1.3 million in response to the enrollment reductions that have been made. But the other thing that makes it that where you can see it, right? So it's not just I'm saying it or Allison or Sue or Mike are telling you that this is happening. When you look at the class size and you go back 4, 5, 6, 7 years, while the number of students are declining, the class sizes are either staying the same or they're ticking up a little bit. So if we weren't making the appropriate reductions in class size, what you would see are class sizes going way down, right? This year, we're making, as Aaron pointed out, another 4 enrollment-driven reductions in order to get to a balanced budget. So that is something that is looked at every single year. Enrollment projections are used to understand that. What we as a committee won't do traditionally, and again, it's a strategic decision, is if the 4th grade next year, I'm making it up, I'm not picking on 4th grade, but if the 4th grade next year, let's say we're going to have 17 kids, per classroom, which would be a bit low, but 2 years from now, there was a group coming, and that's going to be 24 kids per classroom, we likely would not make a reduction because it has to sustain itself. You don't want to be laying teachers off, hiring teachers back, laying teachers off, hiring teachers back. It will become very hard to hire teachers because who's gonna wanna put themselves through that. And it's also just bad for the district, right? The consistency isn't there. The faces that the kids are seeing in school are very different. So we generally will take those reductions when we know, and we're looking backwards 2, 3, 4 years, that it would make sense. And not even in kindergarten, because you have data that goes back 15, 20 years on what the enrollments look like. If we're traditionally down, you might do something there. So we do a fair amount of analytical review of these numbers in order to make the most appropriate and financially sound decision on behalf of both the taxpayer and the classroom.
So with that, why don't we just go to advisory first and see if anybody has any questions or documents that you wish you had seen, or,
I have a question. With your, okay, the revolving funds, you're taking a little bit out, how does that impact those going forward, or does it, or?
So transportation will refill itself every year. We've been taking 100,000 or so from transportation for the past couple of years. This will be the first year that we're taking a chunk from building utilization. What we've used those funds for the past 3 years, where they've been renting classrooms, has really been, for extraordinary maintenance that we weren't planning on during the year. So if something happens and we need to, call in an HVAC vendor, but it can't fit into our budget, we've been using the building utilization funds for that. So it'll hinder our ability to do a little bit of that moving forward, but there'll still be a balance in there. So if something were to happen, we could still go to that fund if we needed to.
Is that the one that will be at wait, I think I just lost that page, like 150,000
Yeah, so,
left?
building utilization.
Oh, no, that was transportation, that will be remaining 186, but you said it replenishes itself.
Right, so
Okay.
building utilization has 184 in it, it'll go down to 134.
The font's rough.
it is.
Doing the best I can.
Okay.
It's much nicer on your computer screen.
Does anybody else have any questions?
The 4 reductions being made based on class size, are those actually happening, or are those projected to happen?
No, they're happening.
They're
So,
happening.
we haven't had conversations with staff yet on who they are. The way reductions work here is that it's really last one in, first one out. So if we have any staff that are in their first 3 years of employment here, they're considered non-professional status teachers, and they're all equal. So we need to take a look at where those staff are in the district, what licenses they have, to figure out where the cuts would actually happen. We're also anticipating a retirement or 2 to happen, which then means we can reduce the position without having a net effect on a person. So some of that work is still happening now. We have till June 15th to notice staff. We obviously would never want to wait that long. We have great people here. We want them to get in a pool and get a job somewhere else if that happens to be where we're at. But we are still working through all of the chess pieces right now.
But even if you reduced 4 positions, the net cost would not amount to that much money.
4 teaching positions is $280,000.
Well, I guess it's a fair amount of money. When you're talking about assessments, these assessment programs you have that are on your wish list, as these assessment programs come into play, do any of them come off? I mean, I understand you have a wish that, geez, it would be great if they had Reading Rainbow, I don't know, whatever assessment program might be.
Sure.
And I can imagine that they're not all what they're turned out to be.
Yeah, there's a pretty extensive process that we review our online curriculum materials and kind of databases and tools for usage, right? So everyone can be gung-ho for Reading Rainbow, but at the end of the day, there's 2 teachers at Bryanville using it. Then we don't fulfill that subscription for the following year. So we do really, if teachers ask for us for something, obviously they are the professionals in that field, we make sure that a few teachers pilot it first to make sure that it's going to work for more than just a niche group. And then we really track the usage of it, because we don't have a ton of extra money for those kind of things. And as new things come up that we want to fund, in most cases it means we have to take something off the list to fund it. So we do really track, Mary Beth and her group really tracks that data a lot to see who's using what as far as software for our staff.
And the secondary elephant in the room to Patrick's elephant, the one that I get asked a number of times I've been asked, is there any way to close schools and to try to combine schools? And I understand most of the answer, but
Sure. So when you drive by the middle school, you think, wow, that's a huge building. The capacity there is 650. Our sixth grade class would fit in there 1 year, but not fit in there 3 years from now. So we've never been able to move our sixth grade over there. We took a series of loans for the roof project that we did here through the MSBA Accelerated Repair Project a few years back. There's a commitment to keeping facilities open for educational purposes with those loans. We did not take a loan for Bryantville. We did not get a new roof on Bryantville, so you could, without any really penalties, close Bryantville. Geographically, Bryantville would never be the school I would recommend closing based off of kind of, you know, the population of students and where they need to get to. What we talked about as part of the master planning committee was, is it time to start transitioning to grade span schools for kids? You know, a lot of surrounding communities do that where, you know, all students K through 2 go to one building, 3 through 5 go to another, 6 through 8 go to the middle school. There's definitely cost savings associated with that. You know, if you had all of your first graders in one place, you could probably run one less section of first grade than we're running now because it's spread over 3 buildings. We don't necessarily have the makeup right now to do that. You would want to be able to close a building to do that. You don't want kids to transition 3 times in elementary school. Transitions are tough for kids. You know, at this moment in time today, we don't have the opportunity to close the buildings because of the commitments we've made with the MSBA funding. You know, but I think a lot of folks have asked us in the past why you don't move the sixth grade to the middle school. It just makes more sense. You can kind of share staffing there. It's a middle school model. The capacity at the middle school would not house our current sixth grade.
And also, isn't it, it's important to note that Bryantville has the most capacity out of them, right?
Right.
So-
North Pembroke and Bryantville are pretty close capacity-wise. So if you were going to have 2 elementary groups, Hobbamock would probably be the school that you would close. I think if you're talking about a larger project, it would make a ton of sense for the middle school and the high school to be on the same campus because then you can share staff and programming and that kind of stuff. But we're definitely not there yet.
So, the other issue, though, and as you just alluded to, Sue, is, you know, we've got to deal with what we have, right? So we have 2 very large capacity elementary schools and one in Hobbamock, very small capacity elementary school. So if you were to close Bryantville, the real question then becomes, how crowded are the other 2 schools, right? How, you know, and is it sustainable? Because if you're closing it for 3 years, the return on your investment is pretty low at that point, because you don't necessarily have fewer teachers, you don't necessarily have, you're down an administrator, you might be down an assistant administrator, and potentially a school nurse. Your savings isn't as big as you might think. Part of it too is we don't spend what we need to spend to upkeep the buildings right now because we're putting what we have to into the classroom. That's been, and it's a good question, I'm glad you asked it, Bob, because it's been studied a bunch. You know, we were actually looking at just the opposite about 8-9 years ago when the bubble was moving its way through the school. We were bursting at the seams. We had remember, Linda, right? We had too many kids. It's like, what do we do? How do we ultimately make this work? But I think, as Aaron pointed out, we took $5.5 million from the MSBA. We would have to pay back a couple of $1 million. So that alone would make anything but Bryantville be just non-financially viable to close. And closing Bryantville, just because of the number of students that would get displaced in any savings that would come, isn't really getting you the savings you desire.
I'll ask a follow-up to that. How closely did we look at the language in terms of how the wording defines keeping a school open
For educational purposes.
for educational purposes?
I mean, I think we could have.
If we were seriously looking.
Yeah, I
at
think
the
we could
idea
have
of
our legal
closing.
counsel take another look at it, but if you're looking for operational savings, keeping it open in any sense isn't gonna give us much of that. You know, you'll remember that a couple of years ago, we gave back to the town the plot of land that was for the 4th elementary school. So I think we just came to the realization that we're not gonna ever need a 4th elementary school here in Pembroke. So I would be cautious to be giving back the 3rd at this point too. But we can take a look at it if it's the direction you all want to move in.
Right, the other thing to consider is that, Patrick mentioned the bubble that came through a few years ago. Right now, student population is a little down. but you see all these buildings that are about to be permitted in Pembroke now. I mean, the economy is it's a little stagnant right now. That's why these buildings haven't been built yet, but eventually they're going to be built. So we close a school, we maintain it or board it up for 3 or 4 years. Now we have to renovate the whole thing that's been sitting vacant. We need to protect it, insure it, all that other stuff still has to happen. And then if population comes back even just a little bit, now we have to reopen that school and you know, what have we done? Have we saved enough to, make it worthwhile? And I think Patrick said it right. They've been studying this, so it's not something that they have blinders on about. They have looked at it, and if anyone needs more data, I'm sure they have more to offer you.
Yeah, happy. Anybody that wants to talk about this, I mean, I got my start in Pembroke Public Education in 2004 on a redistricting committee. So I've literally been studying this for 20 years. I would be happy to talk to anybody that wants to have a conversation about it. I'd actually take the opposite approach, right? One of the things that for a long time, because of the bubble, which was a 3-year bubble, population bubble between 1999 and 2001, we had a lot of babies. I mean, it's just the reality. And the class that my daughters were in 2000 was also the class that tied the Guinness Book of World Records for the most multiples in one class. So there is a huge bubble that moved through, and we didn't have space. And we were telling zoning, we were telling planning, we were telling these guys, we were telling all of you, please no more kids. Like, we can't put them, we don't have the space. The opposite has happened. Please green light communities that are going to bring in young families. It's good for the town, it's good for the district. Enrollment goes up. We do get that per pupil spend, you know, reimbursed from the Commonwealth. And the economies of scale work both ways, right? So, you know, as much as we'll say to you, I know enrollment went down by X, but enrollment, when it goes down by 100 kids, it's not like 33 in 6th grade, 33 in 2nd grade, 33 in 8th grade, cut a teacher. It's scattered throughout, you know, multiple classrooms. The add of kids is the same way, so you don't just immediately have to add staff because you're getting kids. So as we're all kind of making our way through government and potential projects are coming up, we want projects with young families. We want more kids moving into the community.
Do we know the clawback numbers for the schools?
Sorry?
The clawback numbers, do we have those?
The clawback numbers?
If you took the loan and you wanted to close the school, there'd be a clawback number for...
It's a couple $1 million right now. I don't know
We
the
haven't
exact
looked at it in a
number,
while, but I can
But
get
each school would be different, correct? Other
No,
than
but the roofs,
Bryantville.
no, because the roofs were done, and sorry, I'm from the Midwest. I say roof, not roof. The roofs were done all in the same summer, or, you know, so they were done all about the same time. So it's not from when the buildings were renovated, 99, 2000, 2001. This was 2012. So it's how much is that bond or that note ultimately dwindled? My guess is there's still a couple $1 million, but that is very much a guess.
Aren't they coming off like fiscal year 27 though? So
That's the renovation.
Oh,
So
okay.
That's the 1999 to 2000
Those are the
renovation.
debt excluded.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's been, people have mentioned to me when they hear about the VOTEC situation, someone has postulated that maybe on a limited scale, since we have the possibility of an extra elementary school, would be to do something with that as a VOTEC, because I don't know what the numbers will be when, you know, Hanover finally puts it out there as to if Pembroke could become part of that, and would we want to spend that kind of money for the number of kids that might be eligible for it, and if they go to a total lottery system, there's no guarantee that, you know, how that would work. I know the Pathways project is not destined to be a VOTEC, but are there any other issues aside from joining a VOTEC that are possibly being discussed, I guess is the way it put.
Yeah, so I think we are and have talked about pretty much every option that's out there. Obviously, the smallest conversation is, what if we just got one Chapter 74 program, right? What if we were able to soup to nuts outfit an early childhood program at Pembroke High School and use Hobbamock as the site? There's a tremendous capital investment that would be required to do that. The permitting, the licensing to do that. There's nobody in the state of Massachusetts that's just running one Chapter 74 program. The Department of Elementary and Secondary Education cautioned us against that model whatsoever. At the end of the day, that would, perk an interest in 12 of our students that are currently looking for vocational, so I'm not sure that that makes sense. The next was retrofitting, like what if we could get a shop into the high school? What if we could get where the old wood shop was, the garage doors there, what if we could use that space? Keep in mind that none of that was touched during the renovation, so if we start to open that up, we are opening up all of the building envelope at Pembroke High School. The electrical, the HVAC, all of it would need to be addressed and brought up to the current code. I think if you're gonna look at using one of our elementary schools and retrofitting it or remodeling it, I mean, the price floating out there to just renovate the current South Shore Voc building that already has some Voc pieces in it is upwards of $200 million. So,
$200 million?
yeah, so keep in mind, there's a reimbursement rate through MSBA for that type of project too. It's about 52%, so.
Stroke out
I
at
mean,
the
there's-
table.
There's no town our size that does it
Themselves.
because it's just not cost effective. That's why you have to join, everyone joins districts.
How do we offer classes? Is it the number of students that are offered? I mean, we've already talked about French and Latin
So our
not
classes
being
run
that
based off of
popular, but
student interest.
is it the faculty that decides what offerings will be, or is it the parents that would like their children to have access to this?
It's our students and our families, right? So families vote with their feet. We publish a pretty extensive program of studies offering each year at the secondary level, and we run the courses that students and families select. Obviously, we don't put courses in the program of studies that we wouldn't be able to staff, right? So we're not going to put Mandarin Chinese in there because we don't have somebody that teaches Mandarin Chinese. But if we have, a teacher that's, super excited about the history of rock and roll, and 2 kids pick that class, we don't run that class. So it's really student interest driven.
Any other questions from advisory?
When is the next contract up for the teachers?
So units A and B, which are our teachers and nurses, they're together, expire on June 30th of 2025.
Wait, so
So they
that's
have 1
next
year
year.
left. Yep.
But we're in negotiations now.
We're in negotiations with units C, D, and E. Those expire. So C is our custodians, administrative assistants, and network technicians. D is our paraprofessionals, and E is our food service workers. They expire on June 30th of this year.
So just couple of quick notes. So last night, my daughter's a science teacher in Braintree. So.
Big cuts there, I saw.
Yeah, so she's been there a while, she'll be fine, but there's 100 professionals being laid off tomorrow, so just thankful we're not in that position here, that's for sure. Patrick, I want to go back to something you said.
Sure.
And absolutely, we want people moving into this town with a lot of children and a lot of babies. Absolutely want that, a lot. But what I also want, and this is probably directed more towards the select board and the other boards and committees in town, is we need business within our community. We need revenue within our community, and it can't just come from the residents. It shouldn't just come from the residents. We're out of balance here. So anyone that has any influence with any board at any time, when someone proposes something, let's be as friendly and open as we possibly can, staying within our rules, I get it, but let's not make them so challenging and difficult that people run away. And us as residents, the NIMBY problem that we have and that every town has, let's tone it down just a little bit. Let's tone it down just a little bit. So that's all I wanted to say. I came here with a different mindset, quite honestly, about how out of whack the want was versus what we can do. I'm just pleased with what I've heard and what I've read, and I just commend you for the work that you've done.
For whatever it's worth on your comment on the business piece, in that this is 100% anecdotal, right? I mean, I don't think we've ever surveyed businesses in town, but a lot of new businesses, especially small businesses that come to town, it's daunting and it's scary, candidly, right? Sure. Going to zoning, going to planning, sometimes going before these guys. I actually have heard directly from business owners, and not one or two, multiple business owners, Pembroke makes it about as easy as they've seen in most cities and towns, especially restaurants are in multiple different towns. We've actually heard that a lot. I completely agree with you, by the way. I think the more business that we can bring to town, and the more jobs and the more people coming into town and spending money and buying meals and paying a meals tax and those types of things, it's a boon and it's a huge win for the town. So I agree with you, but I don't know if it makes you feel any better, but what I'm hearing from business owners is very positive about the way I think we as a town approach business.
We may be traveling a different circle.
Oh, it could be. No, 100% could be. In fairness, that absolutely.
No, I think to speak to what both of you guys are talking about is, in terms of how easy it actually is, it is about similar to our neighbors. However, there is a perception that's out there that we need to overcome.
Yeah,
And I think
that's fair.
that's part of the issue.
That
Is that
perception is earned.
What's that?
That perception is earned,
Yeah,
all right?
absolutely.
We've discouraged certain development that would have helped us. Not, like 2 years ago, there was talk about a supermarket going where Chip Tech used to be. And a bunch of people showed up and said, oh my God, no. All right, and what you all we need to realize is, every time you chase out commercial development, you're actually voting for higher taxes for yourself. All right? Because the simple fact is, the schools are roughly 50%, not counting the benefits that are also in there. So the schools are the biggest expense in this town. Businesses don't bring in kids, so they're actually paying the same taxes,
Yep.
but they don't bring on the same burden.
It's all upside.
And to your point, we had a really robust conversation at the master plan committee around that, because, we had an economic roundtable with a lot of area businesses and really echoed what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I think we took those to heart and we included them in the master plan. So when you have a moment, if you want to look through what we discussed, because we do really want to make it friendly to businesses, and that was really a big part of our conversation, so.
So one last piece, and it's more of an observation, and I might have done the math wrong, so correct me. But when I looked at the budget, it looks like the salaries are going up just under 3%.
Yeah,
That's
give
probably
or
right.
take, right.
Yeah.
Okay. So everybody understands that's usually the average across any business. So it's well within that.
Right, so I sent everybody a copy of our Units A and B collective bargaining agreement. So for next fiscal year, it's a 2% COLA. But for anyone not familiar with the way educational grids work, teachers have steps also. So you move through the steps. So if you're a teacher that's been here for 8 years, you move from step 8 to step 9, so you'd get that step increase and the COLA. A whole lot of our staff have been here for a long time, and they're on the top step, and they're just getting the COLA. So that's kind of why it levels out around the 3.
Yeah, but this was across everybody,
Yep.
not just the teachers.
Yeah, it was.
It's well within that.
Absolutely.
And Aaron, just to be clear, that's not unique to Pembroke.
Oh, no, that's not unique to Pembroke, that's not even, it's definitely everywhere in Massachusetts, but it's a lot of other states
Yeah.
as well.
So if there aren't any other questions or comments from over here, I'd like to bring it over to the select board, see if anybody on the,
A few of my questions were answered already. And maybe this was addressed, sometimes I'm hard of hearing. The heating of buildings went up considerably, 152,000.
Yeah, so the spreadsheet that I gave you is our fiscal year 23 actuals, our 24 budget, and our 25 budget. I would anticipate the 24 budget will come in a little bit less than what we have budgeted there. But
Quite an increase. Was there a particular reason for it, or just forecasting?
The rates go up, the therm rate has gone up as well. Obviously, we have a significant amount of savings that happen on the electrical side. It's not so much the same on the heating side. But we have also had a significant amount of loss in the past couple of years associated with frozen pipes in a lot of our buildings. So our set points at our buildings are considerably low. So I think it's 62 for 6:30 a.m. on a Monday morning. So we, in the past year or so, have gone back and really changed the way the operation of the building is happening over the course of the weekend for really cold weekends, and keeping the HVAC and the heating going at a higher level than we have in the past. We have had pretty significant loss at the high school in particular each of the last 4 winters for frozen pipes. This year, it happens to be the wastewater treatment plant at the high school. Anytime something like that happens, it ends up being an expense close to $75,000. So there is definitely an increase in the usage as well as the rate as we move forward.
Thank you, that's all.
Yeah, I got a couple questions. You mentioned the transportation was about just under $2 million?
So our regular ed transportation, yes.
Regular ed transportation, okay. And how much do we get for receipts for that? I know you guys are gonna talk about fees and
Yep,
everything later,
so we
but-
take in, so transportation is the sliding scale, so, there's folks that are full pay and there's folks that are free, so anybody that qualifies for free and reduced lunch gets bus pass for free, and then we have a reduced rate for people that kind of fall, in the middle. We take in about $82,000 a year, for bus pass.
So there's an almost total gap there, so that must be subsidized by the general fund.
Yeah,
totally
the
paid
purpose
for.
of the transportation fee was never to fully fund transportation, right? It's just
Okay, so
kind
even
of
if you increase the fees a little bit here and there, you're not gonna take much of a bite out of that piece there. Okay. Another thing I noticed looking at the cost components per student spending, the instructional leaders.
Yep.
They make up about anywhere from 8 to 10% of the total expenditures per student. It's also either the highest or the second highest compared either to the comparable districts or neighboring districts, so pretty much across the board. I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit more. It's basically one thing that I think about, okay, so we're, obviously, student enrollment's going down, and we handle that by keeping class sizes the same. Teachers obviously go down appropriately. So where are all these other costs coming from then? And where would you say, in your experience, your assessment of the years, have they been all concentrated in one place? Is it spread evenly? Is it, inflation doesn't seem to explain it entirely? So that was one, the instructional leadership jumped out at me. I don't know that that's the reason, but with everything else being mostly middling, with Pembroke overall expenditures per student being middling compared to the neighboring districts and comparable districts, that was one thing that jumped out. So this is kind of a two-part question there.
Yep, I'm trying my best. So I hit on it a little bit when I went through the slides. The way that we code our content supervisors is as instructional leadership. In other districts, their department heads fall under the teacher category because they're members of their collective bargaining agreement, so they fall under their unit A or B. Ours do not, so they're pulled out as instructional leadership. So that accounts for some of it, right, how people are coding. The second piece to your question, so when the teacher evaluation system changed about a decade ago, we made a real conscious effort here in Pembroke to make that a process that was meaningful for staff here. So instead of once a year, I'm going to come in your classroom and see what you're doing and check the box and say I observed and I evaluated you, the change in the evaluation system gave us an opportunity to get into classrooms more, to have conversations with teachers. Before it was, for lack of a better word, a dog and pony show. I'm coming into your class next Tuesday at 10. You knew I was coming, you prepared your lesson, I take notes, I'm evaluating you. Here, staff is in and out of classrooms all day, every day. We're seeing amazing things. Sometimes we see things that are less than amazing, that are a snapshot in time, but it facilitates so much more conversation. It was a conscious effort to move to content supervisors to give some fidelity to that process. So if you are a science teacher at Pembroke High School, it's really important that our building administrators get in your classroom and see what's going on in there, but it's really important that you get feedback from somebody in the content that you're certified in. So having somebody looking at science, math, humanities, world languages, arts across the district gives our teachers the opportunity to have meaningful conversations about not just how they're teaching, but what they're teaching. So when we shifted from a traditional high school department head model, because we did have that in the early 2000s, to content supervisors, the thought process was really to give our staff the support and development that they deserve, to give them the time and the conversations, and our content supervisors allow us to do a lot more here than any other districts are doing. There's not a lot of places where you have somebody that's looking at what we're teaching in science kindergarten through 12th grade. That has brought us a ton of benefit over the past few years, 10 to be exact. It helps us with curriculum materials. There used to be committees upon committees of teachers and staff that would come together and look at, third grade ELA textbooks. Now we have somebody that really does that work, that knows what you're supposed to be doing in second grade, where you need to be in fourth grade, and what it looks like to get to AP English to really make those recommendations district-wide. So that, for us, that instructional leadership, though we code our staff that way, I would tell you that the bulk of that, why we fall where we fall, is the commitment that we've made to content supervisors.
What kind of so it sounds like someone becoming a content supervisor gives them a bump in their salary or their pay, or is it like a separate component?
I really wish it did, Steve.
No, I'm just trying to understand
Yep.
that
So a
cost
content
increase
supervisor-
comes from somewhere.
Yep, a content supervisor is, all of them have been teachers. So teachers are 10-month positions. They make, let's say, top step, $95,000. Content supervisors are 12-month employees, so they work all summer long doing a lot of the PD work and whatnot. There is a bump in their salary. I think they go to 113. So 99 to 113 for 2 more months of work isn't a huge bump. There's a couple of times that we've hired content supervisors on the first steps that make less than some of our teaching staff in the district. It's a commitment to administration and really wanting to be in that pipeline for staff. There's definitely staff that self-identify as wanting to be content leaders, and we are fortunate to have some really great ones here in the district.
So they're kind of administrative staff in a way. Would you classify them more as administrative or teachers?
So they don't discipline kids or anything like that. They do have supervisory and evaluative responsibilities for staff 7 through 12. So at the secondary level, because most of them hold secondary licenses, they do observations and evaluations at that level in addition to our building-based principles. But at the elementary level, they're really curricular resources for teachers. So K through 6, they don't observe and evaluate. They're just in classrooms helping with science instruction, or talking about phonics with a group of teachers and what materials make sense.
Do you have any metrics or data that support the value that they're bringing to the system?
Yeah, I think it speaks for itself when we share the achievement report 3 times a year here. Our test scores are well above average, well above our comparable districts, and I think a lot of that has to do with the vertical alignment of our curriculum. Again, there's not a lot of places that are looking at what we're giving out in kindergarten and how it tracks to what we want kids to get through our 12th grade.
In terms of tying it directly to the content supervisors, how you can tie how they are increasing.
There's no way to tie that specifically to
Okay, so
any
you don't
one
have
staff
any data
member
specifically to that?
to say how achievement has increased because of having a content supervisor, no.
Okay.
But I do think it's important to point out, if you look at every neighboring community and every comparable Dart community, they have some form of, whether it's content supervisor, department head, or that type of thing. When you actually look at, because as Aaron said during the presentation, some districts take pieces of this and include it in teaching. So everything that our content supervisors are doing, or what we call a content supervisor, places like Duxbury include it in the teaching number. If you add those 2 numbers together in both the neighboring community and in the comparable community, we're at the upper part of middle with almost all of those, right? So the neighboring
districts were about 8th out of 11, like 8th,
So, yeah,
3rd from the
yeah.
bottom.
So
And then comparable, we're somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think your point is well taken, because really what you're saying is, what's the ROI, right? What's the return on investment for actually?
Because the cost does seem
Yeah,
high.
for actually having this model. But again, because the comparative is only great when it's apples to apples, right? And as Aaron sort of said, it's not really apples to apples in this line item for the reasons I just explained. But if you merge the teaching and the content supervisor number together and compare those, we're right in line with where you would want us.
And I think if you, like Erin said, if you look at the results of the performance of the students compared to other districts, you'll see, with AP scores, with everything, you'll see that the model works. And we're focusing all of the funds on a model that works for the students with very little money. Like we said, we don't have a business manager, we don't have like a lot of things that other districts do have. And we're still able to have achievement at a high level.
I
in
did,
comparison.
I know it's not here, but looking at the achievement component, and how that kind of ties back to this model that we're using, that sounds like it's a little bit outside the norm.
So
looked
it's
like
not
some of the-
outside the norm, though. I just want to correct that. So the model we have isn't really outside the norm.
How we add it into our instructional leadership.
It's how we're categorizing
Right.
the expense in that bucket, right? So, one of the things Aaron said is the content supervisor, when we present this next year, we're going to add it into teaching because
Okay,
it's
that makes
more
sense.
where
Right, so like when our
it
director of
belongs.
performing arts teaches 2 classes, but all of her salary is in instructional leadership. Savisa Dar, our director of world languages, teaches 2 sections of French at the middle school. That part of her salary should be in teaching, but right now it's all in instructional leadership.
Okay, so we're going to clean it up a little bit
Correct.
next year.
That's exactly right.
That way we can compare
That's
apples to
exactly
apples.
right.
Yes, but
That's
if you were to add them
exactly right.
together, you would see that it's sort of in line.
Right now, it's a little bit muddy.
It's
it
muddy, you
seems
can't
like.
really tell,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and then talking about the performance component, I mean, I know it's not included here. When you came to the select board and gave us a presentation, I think it was a year or 2 years ago, it might have been a year or so ago. There was some performance stuff there, and maybe it's changed since then, but at that time, it looked like our performance, our test scores, et cetera, were roughly in the middle, if I remember correctly.
We're at, yeah, and if you think of like us as like, what are we, like 22?
24th from the bottom out of 351
Out of 350, right?
districts.
And, but our performance is somewhere up in the middle.
Well, no, I mean, in the middle in terms of versus our neighboring districts and comparable districts, there were scores that listed the performance of,
Yeah.
it was cut across that way.
Yeah.
And then looking at, okay, we spend this much here on this content supervision, what is the ROI on it? Maybe we'll get a better idea when we clean up how that is apples to apples, oranges to oranges, et
And I can
cetera.
tell you, like, our
Yeah.
performance is always above the state level. That I know for sure off the top of my head. 'cause
The state level, though.
Right.
I mean,
know,
I
but
think
still.
everybody wants achievement everywhere to be better than it is right now, right? I think
Right,
that doesn't
of course.
matter if you're in Belmont or Pembroke or Rockland, everybody is looking to increase achievement. That is what we are all here for. But I do think, when we present achievement and when we talk about that, it is a function of how much you're spending per kid. It is a function of that in correlation with what their requirements are for your kids. Mary Beth gave a presentation not too long ago about what we require of our high school students versus what some of our neighboring and comparable communities require for graduation requirements. Requiring a student to take 4 years of science instead of 3 definitely has an impact on their achievement. And so, I think we've really started to dive into what we're asking our kids to do and how do we make sure that they're competitive with our neighbors and with our comparable districts as far as achievement and growing that achievement.
I'd
If the-
actually.
I was going to say, if the state comes back with more money per pupil, what would you do with it?
So obviously we have a little bit of a gap. I would close that gap. It's not feasible to be hiring staff in October when we would really know what the difference is. So I think we would have to probably look at it as more of a multi-year increase, potentially look at that special education pre-buy. Is there a purchase we can make in '25 so that we can plan for the increase for '26? I think that would probably make the most sense. I would love to say there's a lot of talent left in the pools, the staffing pools in October, but there really isn't. You're kind of getting the picked over of folks. But I do think if we're thinking past next year and those funds being available the following year, I really think that .4 business teacher at the high school, that world language at the elementary level, that those are probably the places where we'll focus our energy moving into the next year, if not a facilities shared type something, because we're in that place on the town side and on the school side.
I do think though, and Linda, it's a good question, right? Because if it goes to $120, it could be about $200,000, right? If it goes to $60,000, it's every $30,000 is about another $75,000. There's a couple of things that I think your question gets to and your ROI question ultimately gets to. We have been a very fiscally conservative board over the last, I can speak to 2007, because that's when I started kind of doing this work with the board. That's paid a lot of dividends, and it's hampered us in a couple of places, right? So when you look at achievement and you think of who always is in the top 3, 4, 5, right? You have Lexington, you have Cambridge at times, you have Cohasset. Cambridge, 7, 8, 9 years ago was spending $26,000 per kid. Lexington, my guess is it is easily in the low 20,000s per kid, right? We're spending 16. Now, I think it's okay, right? And candidly, we're not going to bankrupt the town for a couple of points to put on a postcard. I think that the real key that we sit around and ask ourselves on a regular basis are our kids getting a good education and a good, free, fair, and public education here in Pembroke? I can say unequivocally yes. When you look at the schools they're attending, the schools are being accepted to, the success that they're going out and having, even if they don't go to school. I know a young man who started his own business, graduated in 2018, and that business is phenomenally successful. He has done phenomenally well economically and in learning really the ins and outs of his own business. Achievement, Steve, to your point, is the direct bellwether to how are you ultimately doing and what is the comparative analysis. The bottom line number, and whether you're in the middle, in the upper part of middle, below middle, and to your point, I never look at the state score either because we should always be surpassing the state score. Let's be real. There's a lot of factors in that one line item, and I love it, right? I wish we dug into budgets like this for every single person around this table every single year, because we're getting to the nuts and bolts. We're turning over the rocks, we're turning over the stones, so we can look at both our constituents and the taxpayers of this community to say, we did the work. Or to that person that's about to lose the job, we did everything we could to prevent that from happening. That one line item could be 0, and it would have an effect on teaching because they're not getting the guidance and everything else. And what we'd be hearing a lot of is, no one's monitoring the classroom. No one's making sure the rules are being followed. There's not enough supervision of the teacher community and the teachers. The best individual to teach a teacher is another teacher, right? They have credibility. They're believed when they walk in the classroom. Whether we spend the right amount or not, I think we should dive into it. It's a fair question, and no issue with it whatsoever. I think let's make sure that the expenses that we're reporting are fair, right? And again, apples to apples. And splitting it out, it's not that hard to do. Probably should have done it a couple years ago, and we'll do it. But that level of review and that level of sort of peer coaching and peer review and what have you in the teacher community can only make us more successful. It's not going to make us less successful. So spending the money is going to only give us a better shot at success. Not having some form of this this plan or this system or this setup, I can guarantee you will mean less success. It's probably the best way to look at it.
And I just want to finish my train of thought on this. The reason why I was bringing up the state thing is because if you look at the spending, the state average of spending is a lot more than what we spend, but the performance levels are a lot less. I'm just finishing my thought. So anyway.
So just to finalize, that was kind of, did that one component of my question. The other one was, do you know, and if you don't know, I wouldn't expect you to know off the top of your head.
You might be
But I think it's worth, I know.
Oh,
maybe.
come on now, you
Just
gotta
to
know.
say, I know, right? Challenging now, challenging you. I'm giving you an opportunity to shine.
Oh, let's hope for the best here.
So student enrollment's going down. Budgets obviously have to increase. They're increasing more than inflation. Do you know where that is mostly coming from? Is it mostly coming from one or two places in terms of the cost components of per pupil spending, or is it spread across the board?
So there's a couple places. I would say last year, going into fiscal year '24 and then beyond, a big piece of the increases in special education tuitions. So the Operational Services Division, which is the state agency that sets tuition rates for special education schools in Massachusetts, traditionally raises rates annually between 2% and 4%. Last year's rate increase was 14%. So there was a ton of feedback from districts across the community that they weren't able to plan for that. But that is a huge increase, right? So if you're banking on 3%, it going up 3% when you're building your budget, to be told that it's 14%, there's not a lot you can do flexibility-wise with that. Transportation contracts have increased significantly following COVID. There's a shortage of bus drivers out there. Here in Pembroke, we are fortunate enough to have First Student with a lot in our town, but First Student is the only one that bids on our contract when we go up to bid. There's just not a lot of competition in that realm of it. And I think really just overall, the needs of the students are really different. So, you know, during Jess's student services presentation, we talked a lot about, you know, meeting the requirements of students. So we may have fewer students now, but the needs of those students are far greater than the students that were in front of us 10 years ago. And some of it is anecdotal, right? But some of it is actual meeting the needs of a plan, an IEP, or a 504. We're not the ones that decide, you know, what a student necessarily, what their diagnosis is. That comes from a medical professional. So the number of students coming in on IEPs or needing 504s has definitely increased. The complexity of those plans has increased. Jess talked a lot about the number of students that have a behavioral diagnosis as opposed to an academic deficit is much greater than it was prior to COVID. So really, even though the number of students has gone down, the need of the student in front of us is far greater than what it was before.
It's interesting you say that, because I remember as part of the presentation that you gave us before, one thing that did stand out that was very interesting, and this kind of ties very much to what you're saying, is Pembroke versus many of these other school districts in the area, either comparable school districts or even neighboring school districts, has much higher population of special education needs students.
That is the one area we are at the state average, right? I think it's 17%. Yeah, we're right below, the state average is 19, I think we're at 17. 20. So that's something we're below the state average, which we don't get to say often, but we're really close to that number. And I do think, you know, there has been a commitment from the committee, even though a couple of the players have changed over the past 7 or 8 years, there has been a real commitment to building the supports for students, to making sure that kids are supported in their classroom, that teachers feel supported. You know, behavior of students is definitely different following COVID than it was prior to COVID. And really, you know, training teachers to adapt to that behavior requires exactly what Patrick said, a colleague in there modeling it and making sure that, you know, teachers have what they need. And I just, you know, universally, the needs of students are so different. I invite any of you to come here to a kindergarten classroom and take a look at what school readiness looks like for a 5-year-old versus what school readiness looked like for a 5-year-old even 5 years ago. I think a couple years ago I had shared 2 slides of what's expected of a kindergartner. So in 1999, it was expected of a kindergartner to have 3 adult teeth, to have this, that. We're asking you to do multi-step directions. We're asking you to do spatial relation. Just the requirements of what we're asking is so different than what it was before. Education has just changed so drastically, but the needs of the students in front of us, you can visibly see the difference between now and 5 years ago.
And to put numbers on it, I believe in our last meeting, we talked about the number of special needs students we have now compared to 4 years ago. It's gone up about 30, somewhere around 30% in the last 4 years.
So it's our
that's
number of
gonna
students
add-
on a
it's gonna be
plan,
another-
right? So
yeah.
those plans can be for social emotional disabilities as well as academic deficits. So the number of students on a plan has increased. I don't want folks to think that that's all purely specialized instruction for kids. Some of it is counseling. Some of it is, you know, just speech. It's not full academic replacement for all kids.
The other thing too that I think it has to be pointed out, in this, it doesn't matter if it's the school or if it's the town or if it's just about any facet of an expense, right? Since over the last 4 years, inflation has gone up collectively about 25%. If you look at our budget from 23 to 24 and 24 to 25 collectively, that's gone up 5.4%. It's actually below the overall rate of inflation in total for those fiscal periods and those fiscal years. I think when you look at utility rates, those have skyrocketed. You look at the cost of oil, that has skyrocketed. You look at, we've actually been very fortunate that our partnership with the teacher community has allowed us to both bring a fair contract to teachers, but also something that is fiscally reasonable to the district. I think at every turn, I'm not exactly how much more we can demonstrate, we as a committee are doing everything we can to be fiscally prudent and stretch every one of the taxpayer dollars we are given absolutely as far as it can possibly go. I'm even willing to let it snap and try to stretch it again, if that's what we have to do. We can go back and forth about, is this the right ultimate call, or is that the right ultimate call? I think, and I'm gonna continue to say it because I think it's true, I think we have to do this level of review with every budget, with every dollar, everywhere. And I think we'll all be better off at the end of the day for it.
Are there any other questions? Select board?
Why does the VOTEC bus go up $20,000 this year?
Because we have a lot more kids going to the Aggie, so our share of the bus is greater. There's 2 buses
really?
going to Norfolk Aggie.
Not,
Yeah.
including, but does this include Sibley VOTEC then?
Yes, so it includes all of our students that are in any of the places. We do have a couple of kids left at Silver Lake. We don't have any students requiring transportation left at South Shore Vogue. The students that we do have are seniors there, so they're driving. But we have more kids going to the Aggie, so we cost share the bus with Abington, Cohasset, and a couple of other communities.
When was the last time we raised our fees for other buses?
We raised them last year, and the school committee is going to talk about maybe raising them again this year.
And when
We
did
cannot charge fees for vocational transportation.
Right.
That is free.
Right. When did we abolish that elementary piece?
2011.
It's basically a geographic tax.
I remember.
I'll say it again and again.
And you're going to say it when I put the slide up.
When you talk about the influence of COVID on the students, are we as a town projecting, or the school committee projecting that this is going to go on for the next 8 years as we work, 12 years, as the kids work their way through school, or is this just a short-term effect that should resolve itself?
I mean, I don't think the answer is the same for every single kid, but I do think that we see less this year than we saw last year. I would expect to see less next year than we see this year. But I do think kids lost the opportunity and the ability to be a friend or to learn how to make a friend during COVID when everything was really on a screen. I think I'm so lucky that my office is right in front of the preschool and the kindergarten. It's hard, right? It's hard to be a kid. Kids have big emotions, even small kids. And I think that our staff here, with the help of some of the investments that the school committee has made and some of the curriculums that we offer are really addressing those issues in the classroom, and the kid needing to leave the classroom is less frequent than what we've seen in the past. So I don't want to say it's going to go away in 3 years, but I think the number of instances is definitely fewer than it has been last year, and I would anticipate it will be fewer next year.
But isolating kids in a formative stage has an incredibly negative effect.
I was never in favor.
No, I'm just going to say it very, very plainly, as I tend to do. I just think isolating young children and keeping them out of school is going to historically, solely my editorial viewpoint, going to go down as one of the worst things that we did during the pandemic. And I think we're seeing it.
What is the school's position on cell phones?
Cell phones?
On cell phones?
Yeah, so we don't, cell phones, I think it's earlier and earlier that kids get cell phones nowadays. But there is, obviously, there's no place for a cell phone in an elementary classroom. There are some elementary students, upper elementary, that have cell phones, and those are reserved for before school and after school, whether they're taking the bus or not. At the secondary level, there is a no cell phone policy at the middle school as far as during lunch and those kind of unstructured times. Cell phones in the classroom are a function of the teacher and the course, right? So some students use their cell phone as a calculator. Some teachers have students taking quick polls online through an app. So it's really a function of the course and the teacher, but it's kind of mixed across the board. We've talked a little bit in the past about maybe doing a cell phone free hour or 1 day a week where there's no cell phone. We achieved that wonderfully for students back in December when we just shut off the internet. They really enjoyed that, as did the staff. But I do think that's a huge piece of it, right? And my own kids text me from the other room. I'm like, are you guys kidding Not.
I will say, though, you get a scientific calculator now on your cell phone, which is, I mean, Linda, when we had to do this, it was about $120 and would be about $400 in today's money, but there are some benefits, but yeah, that's.
What was it that they said is, in the future, you'd never be able to carry a calculator around wherever you go? That's what they used to tell us in school.
So
Right, that's why you had to
That's-
learn
yeah, that's
certain
exactly
things,
right,
right?
yeah.
Now we got AI to tell us what to do.
Absolutely. All right, so, any other questions?
Just on the out-of-district cost, I was trying to look for it in my notes, but I couldn't find it. You said, or maybe, I think you said it, that they are holding, right, from last year to?
Our number of students that are out of district has been flat.
Flat, okay.
Yeah, and so, if a student goes out, we either have a student aging out or a student that comes back to district. We've had some really nice stories in the past couple of years of students that have rejoined us at the high school, which is amazing. But obviously, our philosophy is to keep kids engaged in this community for as long as we possibly can. They're our kids too, and we want them here in our buildings. But there comes a point where economically, it doesn't make sense to create a program for one student. I mean, it's really those tough decisions that happen for a student to go out of district.
So those costs aren't going up right now?
The number of students is flat, but the costs do increase. So with the OSD increase that went up 14% last year, they're at 5% for this year. That is figured into our maintenance of effort budget.
Oh, right, and you said that earlier, sorry.
Questions?
Yes.
No, you don't get to ask me.
All right,
You have
so.
more?
I haven't asked anything. Gonna go down to Mike, do you have any questions?
Let's see. No, I don't think so. I think everything I wanted to ask has already been, it's already been asked, so.
All right, great.
I'm good.
Allison?
Yes, okay. So just kind of running some of the numbers, just if we have 900,000 in collective bargaining, our FY '25 is pretty much identical to '24. Just like, I know maintenance of effort, but just showing. It's not really a question, just a statement. Okay.
Excellent statement.
So, we, looking at the increase in chapter 70, and it's obviously terrible. We're also the lowest percentage of the of the town budget in the last 10 years.
But keep in mind, health insurance has increased significantly on the town side, so that cost is carried on the town side. Our 25% share is over there. We are not.
Has it been the same throughout this, the share?
Our share has been the same, but that cost has increased like
Dramatically.
25%. Yeah.
Probably 30%.
Right. We're not as huge a piece of the pension liability just because MTRS is fully self-funded, but we do have some staff in our other units that are part of Plymouth County. So some of that pension liability that Bill talks extensively about getting us funded to the right level, some of that is ours too.
Okay.
In our snow removal, we don't budget for our own, the plowing of our parking lots falls under the town budget. We shovel our walkways, our custodial staff, but the plowing happens on the town side.
Okay. So for the enrollment reductions, that's all elementary.
I don't know that.
Because I just think, like, if we're going from, like, if the upper grades are used to having, 16, 17, 18 kids, and we're now going to 25, like, I just feel like we have to be really clear that.
Yeah, I mean,
we wouldn't be doing these, if this was a healthy financial time.
Yeah, if this were
we would
healthy-
not be going to 20, we would not be going to 25 students in elementary classes. We
In
had a
one or
choice.
two instances, we may. It's really, as much as it's a function of the number, it's a function of the students as well, right? So taking a look at, sometimes any teacher will tell you a class of 17 is more difficult than a class of 27, depending upon the makeup of the kids. So yes, we've identified some areas at the elementary level where we could make some reductions that we could sustain for a few years that make sense. Would we be making all of them in a good fiscal year? No, but we'd still be making a couple of them with the intent of reinvesting those funds into our operating budget. I don't want to talk about where they are in the sense that, some of our staff carry licensure K through 12, so it could be anybody, anywhere. There's still a whole bunch of pieces there that need to kind of work
I
their
just
way
know,
through.
like, the trickle-down effect of, like, the achievement that could be happening, because I know back before, I was in Pembroke, but, part of the override was to keep class sizes small, so I just am afraid that we're in a financial situation where that's kind kind of being undone a little bit.
Right. and-
In some
yeah,
cases.
and
where we're
for
gonna
people
have-
that were here during the override conversations, we were very clear that an override buys you at most 5 years. Something needs to change in the funding structure over the course of those 5 years, or we're gonna be back right where we started.
How many
We are
years?
9 years out from the override.
So just to be clear, like, there's going to.
We're maintaining, but.
But there's going to be an increase in class size.
Yep.
This coming year for families.
In some sections.
In some
yes.
sections.
Yeah, but I feel like for some kids, being in a class that they've, through elementary school.
That was 16 or 17
it's
is now gonna be 24.
Going to 25, 24, that is pretty major. So
That's a fair point.
I just want to make sure that, like, if we can get more money, I would want to see us continuing to keep elementary classes where they've been.
Yeah,
because I
that's
feel
just
like
a difficult thing to do in the fall,
No,
right? Because we've
and-
already.
But that's
I hear
where, that's why we're having these discussions, because, I know this is the recommended budget, but, that's a pretty dramatic change for a lot of kids, I feel like. And I just, that's, the achievement could be, undone in some cases. When it comes to the priorities, I know we've gone over them, and just for everybody else to know, like, when you look at the technology budget that was presented to us, we have 5 current technology people. Our DART schools have 9.5, 6, 9, 7, 7, 9, 8, 5, 10. So we are, like, we need these positions. I'm gonna advocate for more money. I know nobody has a tree in their backyard that can do that, but, when it comes to these priorities, like, we are never going to be able to really be where we can be if we keep putting these off. Like, I've heard from the, 4 years I've been listening to meetings, talking about world language, talking about getting ASL, talking about a lot of these, most of us with elementary kids, the playgrounds, like, I won't even go into it,
And
but.
they don't even make the list.
And it's not even on the list. Like,
Yeah.
go to the playgrounds, like, go to Hobmock Playground. It's, so understand where we're at, but I'm extremely disappointed that this is what we're given.
Right, I
Because
think
we
it's
should-
fair to say
this
that we're
should not
treading
be.
water, right? We're definitely
Yeah.
not blazing a trail and
And I
keeping leaps and bounds
get it
forward.
that this is, statewide, other towns are losing dramatic amounts of staffing. I'm very glad we're not there, but, this kind of goes to the conversation of how is this going to continue? Like, should we expect a continuation of not being able to really provide neighboring districts have world language in their upper elementary, it's disappointing that we have to make these decisions to raise fees, To Steve's thing, I did the calculations, it would be $805 per student to cover the buses for, like, everybody, if you did that right. I think that might.
Right, I think.
Vote,
Bill's-
Allison. Vote.
Bill's talked a little bit too. I would love to tell you that this
There's
is.
no way we could get $850.
I think it would
Well, you
be
also can't-
unrealistic to
No, I
tell you
know
that
we
this was
couldn't.
gonna get better for next
Yeah.
year. I think you've
It's
been
gonna be
really
worse, yeah.
honest about the fact that fiscal year 26 is probably going to be
No,
just
and
as
so
bad, if not worse.
I just want to read, coming from the master plan, like, compared to neighboring towns in the state, the district's budget 10 years ago, PPS is underfunded, affecting structural maintenance, course offerings, and extracurricular programming. The building, it's, the VOTEC, like, this is, they list, the successes that we've had based on where we're at, but then they give us this, goals of long-term planning, identify, funding sources. Like, where, how is that gonna happen? Like,
There's only one way it can happen. So.
How do we get there? Like, how
So-
can we help get there so
So-
that we're not having to turn down
So-
teachers? Like, we're fine, like, it's not what.
I
it
could
is.
give you the answer. There's only one way, an override, because the school department has been a certain percent of the budget historically, and they still are. So you're not being underfunded by the town. The town is not culling away your traditional percentage of the town total budget. So the town is not screwing the school department. The state is. The state has been clawing back the percentages of money that they're giving to every community in the state. So this is a state issue where they have higher priorities than the towns and school districts in the state. Now, the state budget has increased exponentially. There's a millionaire's tax, the lottery, all the gambling apps. All these things were supposed to be a boom.
Marijuana.
Gambling, marijuana. They were like a boom. Just, let's bring these in, we're gonna be awash in tax money. Now, all of a sudden, $2 billion in the hole right now, the state is? Where'd all this money go? Because what happens up in Beacon Hill, the same thing that happens in Washington. The more money comes in, the more that goes out. They just keep spending it. They find a new program to spend it on, or they give a large percentage to their buddy's program over here. And where do they take it from? When that money runs out, they start pulling away from the towns. So, as Steve said, you have to vote. Stop voting for people who are gonna screw your town. And that's what's been happening.
And you can see this reflected very clearly in the numbers. We talked about inflation. Inflation is minimum 2.5%, 3%, 8% some years. You look at your percent increase in Chapter 70, it did not go up that much. It went up 0.5%. The town is experiencing the same thing, just like the schools are experiencing. So to Dan's point, it's not the towns that are screwing the schools. You have to look at the state and you have to vote.
But we also have to look at the big picture of, it's not fiscally possible, responsible, political, any of those things to do an override for the schools. Like, that's just not gonna happen. So, and we know that. And so that's why we work with what we have.
So
The way the state set it up is that really the only way for us to get increased funding is to grow, because that's what they want, to build more housing and all that. Make the way Chapter 70 funding is set up, is it only rewards towns that grow.
And a lot of other cities and towns are talking about that on the listservs that we're on. I mean,
yeah.
they're all, I mean, it's an ongoing thing about the Chapter 70 funding.
But then they reduced Chapter 90 funding, okay? They reduced Chapter 90 funding, which has happened recently as well. And then they ask the towns to raise taxes through other means, the municipal empowerment act, et cetera.
Many people may not know what Chapter 90 is. Chapter 90 is your roadway improvement aid. So, and
Infrastructure.
if I may, a couple of things that when you look at Proposition 2.5 and municipal revenue streams, fees are one way, but fees aren't going to get you there, especially if your fees are, not competitive. That doesn't work. I'm not a fan of raising fees. I think fees are appropriate in some areas, but they just, it's just another tax on the residents. So, the new growth. New growth is a lifeblood under Proposition 2.5, and we have to. I know there was a discussion before. We have to stop the NIMBY stuff. We have to stop scaring away investors. I'm going to be presenting in the next month investors that want to come here that we're working with, but we can't scare them away. We need that new growth.
Well, I think that's where the communication is key, because I think that's what turned off Big Y, is people freaked out, thinking that, with the Big Y situation. So that's where I think just in general communication from all of us needs to be really clear that, the growth will save us money, each of our,
Another thing, the millionaire's tax was mentioned earlier, and that was, so when there was a shortfall in revenue, they announced that the millionaire's tax had raised, I want to say something like $1.3 billion from that tax or something like that. Are any towns, and that was supposed to go just to the roads and education. Are there any towns that are actually benefiting from that?
I can't speak to it. I know we're not. Our Chapter 90 allocation for roadways is pretty much flat and has been flat for 7 years. So, I mean, there's been, during COVID, with the CARES money, they did throw a supplemental Chapter 90 in there. Other than that, our regular Chapter 90 has been relatively flat.
I just want to note that there was a town mentioned, so I'll just mention it again. Lexington spends I think you said 9 years ago, it was in the low 20s, Pat, if I remember what you said. But the reason a town like Lexington can spend so much money per student is because they're a wealthy town, and if they went in for an override, citizens who was living in a $10 million house would say, blank check, take it, all you need. So they never have an issue. You know, the people in Pembroke are, anytime the taxes go up, just on the 2.5%, they struggle. So when you ask them for an operational override for the schools or whatever, the community center, it's difficult for them. So we're just not in that position, but there are towns that have that luxury. We're just not one of them.
I do think it's important to point out, right? So the town increased their contribution to the schools this year by $836,000. A lot of money. I mean, it is a lot of money, right? And there's a lot of back and forth to get there, but we ended up getting there. And I thank you guys for everybody behind that table here and here for supporting public education in Pembroke. And I'm grateful for it. There are two fundamental realities, right? The Chapter 70 formula, and I've said this a million times around this table, we've talked about it at multiple selectmen meetings, is skewed toward the urban centers because that's where the political votes are. It's not going to
over $30,000 per student in the Boston schools, and they're basically fighting off receivership right now.
It's not going to change, right? I mean, it is not going to change. The one thing that we've been able to show here in Pembroke is it's not always about the amount per student, it's about how you use the amount per student. And I think we've done that phenomenally well in a very fiscally prudent and conservative way. What you're actually getting at, Allison, and I think it's the right ultimate question is, we need a coordinated, cohesive, long-term fiscal strategy for Pembroke. And we need to do that in an integrated way, right? We can't be fighting with each other, can't be arguing with each other. We've got to put, whether it's party labels or politics or anything else, completely to the side. And we've got to come around a table with these people at it and say, how are we going to sustain this town for the next 3 years or 5 years? Because to your point, who knows after that? I mean, honestly, who knows? We've tried to do it a couple of times. I think a couple of times we've been mildly successful, and as Dan pointed out, you know, when property taxes go up just a little bit, it hurts people. We have a lot of people in this community that are on a fixed income. Our seniors cannot sustain an override after override after override, and in order to just get the override, because I've led a couple of them on behalf of the district, you have to prove to people the need, and you have to prove to people that you've done everything you can before you go and ask them. There's an immense amount of work that goes into that, but having a mid to longer term economic strategy for the town, I think you're spot on about that. I know the master plan gets to some of it, just it's super high level, which it should be, right? It's a master plan, but we have to get there.
You know, like, how do we ever achieve? We're always going to have these.
Well, I've been around this table, barring a couple of years, for 17 years, and we have yet to be able to achieve it.
Yeah,
and I'm pretty good at this.
You know, these were things that we had 10 years ago, and don't now. So.
Well, I mean, I think the first step is awareness, right? And I think, last year when I went to the select board and said, like, we really need to come together and figure this out, because last year we were like really off the mark. I think we've come light years in a year. We've had multiple joint budget meetings, and now I'm very thankful to all of you, because we're all sitting here around a table and we're able to educate everybody here about what our process is, so that you understand clearly where the numbers are coming from, what our thought process is, and I think I'm really grateful that everybody's willing to do that, and I really feel like this is a step in the right direction. Clearly, a lot more work needs to be done in order to come up with a long-term plan, but I feel like the awareness really is the first step.
I agree.
So.
And I'll, unless you all on the selectmen and you all on advisory say something else, I think we should do this every year.
I agree.
I think we should do our school budget closeout, at the end of our session like this. It allows you guys to ask anything you want, right? It is fair game, nobody's hiding anything, nobody's trying to get something behind the curtain or anything else. I think we should do it on the town side too. I think when we present the town budget, we should do something very similar. I think it would be, I think the more of those things we can dispel and show a unified front, even if we're pushing each other a little bit, right? Asking some really good questions. I mean, Steve, there are a couple of things that you brought up tonight that we're gonna go back and look at. I think it was really good. The business comment, I think, is a spot on one. Asking about closing the schools, that you guys all get asked about that. But so what does it mean, or how do we answer that? That's valuable to the residents of Pembroke, right? And I would do this every year at the end of our session, and I'd love to do it when we do the town presentation and allow us to really ask some of those finite, detailed questions. I mean, our budget's not done when you guys do the town piece, but I think it's great.
Is there any way to do it earlier, where?
It's really, be really hard for us.
Because we're not even done, we haven't even finished with the transportation, I mean, the fees, fee conversation, so.
Part of it though, Linda, is we do, sorry, Steve.
No, it's okay.
There's a benefit to doing a bottoms-up approach, right, which is really why you get the wish list.
Right.
And you get, so what we end up doing is we ask each of the school administrators and the major department heads of the curriculum verticals within the district to take a step back, start with a blank piece of paper, and what do you need to effectively run your department, your building, your portion of the organization. And what it does is it gives that push and pull. It's, do I really need this? Well, this is more important, so I want this, and then we get the wish list, right? The downside, so there's a lot gets challenged in where you're doing that, right? The downside to that is it just takes longer. So we're not just going, this is what it was historically, this is what it will be.
No, my only point is the town starts around the 1st of December for the following year.
We start in September.
I mean, I realize school doesn't start until in September, but if it could all be, it's pretty late at this hour to try to affect anything for May.
But they started in October.
Yeah, we did start in October. Yeah, we did.
Okay, but I guess bringing some of this up earlier to everybody.
We had our joint meeting with the select board back, and the first one was October. Was it October? Yeah, the first one was October. So we were showing the maintenance of effort budget we didn't have any of the admin priorities listed yet because we don't know what some of them are yet.
Okay, I guess I was unaware of that. Obviously, advisory was not involved.
Yeah.
But Linda, I will say the benefit of, we're doing two things right now, right? We're closing out 25 and talking about it. We're also talking about 26 though,
That's
right?
what's
And
the
that's the
important
important part is, I agree. I totally agree.
But we're still not using solid numbers.
Well, it's 95% done. It's just, as you can see.
No, he means the governor's budget.
Oh,
and the
yeah,
House budget.
yeah, exactly.
State revenue we won't have until, could be
July.
July 1.
Yeah.
August,
Could be
this is
August.
There's much sarcasm.
Right.
So you don't actually know what your solid
No, you
figures
don't.
are.
No, you
You may
don't.
get some if you wish, if this thing turns around. Then again, we could all be surprised in a couple of weeks.
I mean, look, the reality is, if you read the tea leaves, we had 9 seat cuts this year, capital gains was down, state revenues were down. I think, anytime I do this, even for my job, it's you budget for the worst and you hope for the best. And if at the end of the day, the numbers come in a little bit better, then it's a discussion between Bill and Aaron of how do we most effectively, use this on behalf of the taxpayer. I can't say that enough. It's about the taxpayer, right?
Could we, I don't think we've had Bill yet.
Yeah, would you like to?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I have a lot of questions, but they're not questions for, Aaron and I have, we've changed how we're meeting.
That's fantastic, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
I think we'll work that out behind the scenes. I think it's more effective that way.
Sure.
I did have, I hope it's a softball question for you.
Take the
Sure.
So, one of the things that I've always, I'm going to use this term, people I know, I got feedback that it's not a good term, but it will take me way out of my lane to go into the schools. Special education, Can you talk a little bit about two things that I think people need to hear and maybe have? I used to watch all of your meetings, unfortunately, with master plan and a bunch of other stuff going on. I haven't had that opportunity this year. So special education costs are different, and you alluded to the 14% increase, but can you talk about as a whole, not just the increase, but the increase, you talked about the number of students and what that means, and then the projections for special education moving forward. I guess the question I have that will just probably throw people away is, what, for our highest cost special education student, what do we pay?
So we have a student that's in a 24-hour residential placement right now that is, I think, 425 plus an full-time aide at 160, so I think it's about a little under 600,000 for just one student in one placement.
Yeah, so that's the point I was trying to make. You've got some of these specialty students that, when you talk about special education, it's different than it was. And as a manager, I recognize that. Unfortunately, it breaks my heart that there just isn't the revenue to support some of the other stuff behind that. Those types of students, just like on our healthcare side, like on our healthcare side, we may have 3 or 4 people.
The mic only helps the people at home. You really need to speak up. Just
yell at the people in the room.
Speak up, okay. Just like on the healthcare side, we have 3 or 4 people that are $900,000 total. So special education, you may have a handful of students that are pushing $1.5 million. So that's the other piece. The other piece that I wanted to talk about was transportation. Your in-district transportation is what it is. You're gonna pay those fees. Those fees have gone up dramatically, but it's the out-of-district transportation and some of the McKinney-Vento stuff, and I'll let you explain
Right,
that.
so we don't have a ton of McKinney-Vento here, so McKinney-Vento was homeless students, so homeless students that last resided in Pembroke, where you're responsible for providing them transportation from their temporary shelter or placement back to Pembroke Public Schools. We don't have a ton of that, but what we do have is a ton of, students that are in private day placements for special education at times where the transportation to get them to and from is more expensive than the actual tuition. Geographically, most of those schools are located in the 128 belt. They're not near here. Most of the times it's a singleton student, so we do try very often to cost share a van with a neighboring community that's sending a student there. But there are times where there's a single kid riding on a van and the cost of the van is $62,000 for 180 school days.
Yeah. So my point is that there's, just like on the town side, but we have some specialized costs that are outrageous in my opinion. The schools have similar specialized costs built into their budget. That takes away from the average student, unfortunately. But everything is at a cap and under Prop 2.5.
I wouldn't say that.
Well,
because I want to be careful, right? I
understand
what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
There are
It
very
doesn't
large
give you the,
costs, right?
so it doesn't take away, that's poor, you're right. It doesn't give you the opportunity to add those things that Allison was trying to add, because it eats that excess budget number, and you can't add those. Your wish list isn't
One of the
accomplished.
unfunded mandates that,
Yeah.
10 years ago, just looking at that list, that,
I mean, it's $6 million
Yeah.
for funded mandates,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
I mean, it is really important to point out that we have an obligation, and I believe it to be the right obligation, to give a free and fair public education to every child. And that means for some children, it's $16,000. For other children, as Aaron said, it is $600,000. Should the state provide funding for that? 100%, right? Will the state provide funding for that? Absolutely not. Right now, there is circuit breaker, and we do get a piece of that back, is full disclosure, we absolutely do. But the reality is that is an unfunded mandate that we have to absorb.
And I'm not saying we don't. Don't misunderstand what I said. I fully support, and I think we need to support those students 100%. It's just that it would be nice if the state would contribute to that.
Absolutely. So, any other comment?
So I have something.
Sure.
It could be final for this meeting. So we've now had a roundtable with school committee, select board, advisory, town manager to speak of your budget. Your budget is 99% baked with just a little discrepancy at the end that you might be able to take care of. You'll figure out the ways, most likely fees, you said. So if, Bill, this is the budget they're essentially presenting for that's their request. Does that match your budget that you want to submit to town meeting?
Yeah, if they get to, Aaron and I have talked about
Yeah,
that.
we're
and,
balanced.
Yes, we are essentially balanced with a couple of little pieces, and we're balanced on the town side with one tiny piece. I think we're there. You know?
So I'm going somewhere with this.
I was hoping so.
I'm shocked.
So if everyone in this room is in agreement, and we're gonna talk about it again when Bill does his final presentation, so there's one more bite at the apple if you like. But I wanna make sure that everyone in this room, you have all your questions dispensed with, because when the select board votes the budget that Bill presents us, that matches the school committees, I wanna go to town meeting and be able to stand up there and with full throat and my heart in it, say, I want the town to vote for this budget. And I don't want anyone in this room to have any reservations about that and raise their hand and say, I want to amend this budget because I don't like some line item. So, and I'm not trying to hold you to it, because you can do what you want on town meeting. But if anyone has any other reservations, please bring them up, because I want to go into town meeting unified.
Agreed.
Agreed, yeah. Honestly, I feel like Aaron and Bill, working together, they've done a phenomenal job. They've been sort of put through the firing squad, like both committees, and, it's been a lot of work and a lot more than usual. And I'm really proud of where we landed, because watching what other towns are going through right now, asking for overrides, we're not asking for an override, and we're able to balance our budgets without too much collateral damage. And, obviously, to Allison's point, we want to someday get all of this stuff funded. However, I'm really proud of how both of them have handled this situation and really powered through to put together a solid budget, so.
Yeah, I mean, if I could just add to that, I mean, Sue pushing for the joint budget subcommittee, pushing that back through and leading the charge for that, even though, maybe some of the conversations were a little bit raw at times. Sometimes we have to have those raw conversations to bring it all to the surface and then move forward and then get to a place where everybody's a bit more comfortable with, that makes a little bit more fair for everybody, or whatever the case is. So my hat is off to you on that 100%. So thank you for that, and thank you, Erin, and thank you, Bill, and Pat, and John, and Tracy on the joint budget sub, definitely.
Right.
From my side of the view, I'll be honest with you, I had a lot of questions that were answered tonight. I felt, given my past experience, that I didn't get those answers. And I feel tonight we got a lot of answers. To that end, I think we still have to work towards, I know there's no fat in the budget, but I bet there is somewhere in there. If we look harder, because next year we may have to look harder. Because next year, we might be Braintree, looking at an 8% reduction across the board. I hope we're never there. But we need to keep looking for not just where we can improve, but what can we lose that we don't necessarily need to get our students where we need them to be. That's my 2 cents. But I appreciate everything you did. I think it was a great meeting. I think we should definitely do this next year. The only thing I might add is maybe the public might want to add something.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to come up to the microphone? Of course, as usual, state your name for the record.
Helene Flashman. I have a pretty straightforward question, really for Select Board / Bill, Town Manager. We're talking about the need for more kids in the school system to help fund things and bring growth. We have a number of projects that are limited to 55 and over. Is there anything we can amend to any of these projects, either upcoming or existing, that might help restrict it?
Yeah, I think at this point, I would strongly recommend we don't put a monkey wrench in these projects. Let's get them done and get the growth.
There's some projects down the road, yeah.
Moving forward, as we analyze the master plan and take a look at some of our zoning, there could be some zoning amendments that would not only bring the right type of residential growth, but also some nice commercial growth that I think would be, something we want to look at.
I was curious because near the golf course, those housings are limited to 55 and over, is that correct?
That's correct, but that's a zone.
Would those ones that would sustain a change or not really? Not possible?
Not likely that the developer there builds that type of model. They've been successful with that type of model. Our zoning zones that type of model there wouldn't allow for, well, it would, but you'd get far less growth if you put single-family homes in there. So,
I just didn't know if any families could buy in that wouldn't otherwise. But anyways, I just wanted to ask.
All right, is there any questions in the mailbox?
No.
Okay, all right, perfect. All right, so with that, I would suggest to my committee that maybe we hold off our fee conversation until the next meeting, given the late hour, but we can do it if you're. The 23rd.
Is that enough time?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
it
fine,
is.
yeah.
Yeah, it is. I'm okay with that.
Okay. All right, so if everybody's okay with that, then we've just talked about future meeting dates and topics.
If you're done with us.
Yes,
I'll
if
ask-
you want to
You're gonna
close out your meeting.
I'll ask the select board for a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
Motion made, all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Good. I'd make a motion to adjourn for advisory. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it.
Is there a
It's
motion?
always the fastest motion, by the way.
And is there a motion to adjourn the school committee?
So moved.
Is there a second? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, we're adjourned. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, that was great. Yeah, no, it's a.